Welcome. This is a BridgeUSA event in partnership with Free Intelligent Conversation and Heterodox Academy. This is a Q&A/AMA with Jon Haidt. The idea here is, I know everyone's been at home, and all these organizations came together and we're looking for ways to continue to engage people despite being at home, and looking to engage in meaningful conversations and good dialogue. So that was kind of the impetus for this event, and that's what brought us here. Ross, I have a couple people who messaged me saying they can't find the Facebook link, so it's the live link to join. So I don't know if there's anything missing there, but I figure I flagged that. So
I can see it.
Cool. So before we get started, I figured it might be most useful to begin by introducing the organizations represented, starting with BridgeUSA. And to introduce BridgeUSA, we're going to have Emile Garcia, from president of ASU chapter of BridgeUSA and national director of youth development. So please, Emily, go ahead and introduce yourself and introduce what BridgeUSA is.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Kyle. My name is Emile Garcia, and I am currently the president-elect for BridgeUSA at Arizona State University, and I also serve for the national branch as the national director of youth development. And on behalf of BridgeUSA, I would just like to thank FreeIC, Heterodox Academy, and Jon Haidt for just putting on this conversation for all of us to just exchange views on a national level. We're so appreciative of this opportunity. BridgeUSA is creating a movement of students who rise above polarization to build a more vibrant and unified democracy. In order to achieve this, we attack destructive political culture at both the grassroots and institutional level. In terms of grassroots, we create chapters on college campuses that advocate for viewpoint diversity, responsible discourse, and solution-oriented politics. We then use that support to lobby decision makers within the university to accelerate policies aimed at creating a more open and inquisitive learning environment. Finally, we provide professional development opportunities so that our students can apply the BridgeUSA principles practically off campus as well. And thank you again.
Wonderful. The next organization represented here is Free Intelligent Conversation, and I promise I will not have as good as the description as Emily just shared, but Free Intelligent Conversation is a nonprofit organization that is concerned with creating meaningful conversations in public spaces. I happen to be the founder of Free Intelligent Conversation, and the problem I was solving for is that me and a handful of friends were looking for ways to engage in meaningful conversations with people, and we just couldn't find a place that publicly facilitated that interaction. Like, my friends were going to parties, bars, clubs, bookstores, etc. And all of those, like, people go there for another reason, and you hope a conversation happens. And I was asking the question of, like, where do the people who just want a conversation go? So I had this crazy idea of I'd stand outside in the middle of a city and hold this sign that said Free Intelligent Conversation, inviting people to stop and talk about anything. And the idea was that an intelligent conversation would be learning from whom you're speaking with. So when people stopped and asked what, I just told them I was there to learn from them. Since then, we have grown into an organization where we've had thousands of volunteers lead and join hundreds of events across 30 countries around the globe. Just continuing to spread our mission. There seems to be a group of people like myself who are interested and looking for ways to create conversations in their community, and Free Intelligent Conversation has been a great tool for them. So that is FreeIC. Next organization is Heterodox Academy, and I will kick it to Daniel to go ahead and introduce that.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Coas. I'm the event planner at Heterodox Academy. If you're not familiar with Heterodox Academy, we are a group of nearly 4,000 college professors, administrators, graduate students, people working in higher ed in all different ways. And we have three main things that we strive for. We aim to improve the quality of both teaching and learning by pushing for open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement. A lot of shared values, obviously, with BridgeUSA and FreeIC, and we are so thrilled to be here with you guys. Thank you for having us. Yeah, kick it back over to you, Kyle.
Excellent. Okay, so let me introduce Jon Haidt, who is our speaker here. Jon is a social psychologist and professor of ethical leadership at NYU Stern School of Business. His academic specialization is in psychology of morality and moral emotions. Haidt is the author of 3 books, The Happiness Hypothesis, or The Righteous Mind, and most recently, The Coddling of the American Mind. The last 2 books became New York Times bestseller. Haidt was named one of the top global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine and one of the top world thinkers by Prospect magazine. Jon, excited to have you here. Thank you for joining.
Oh, my pleasure, Kyle. What a great group of groups. You know, as some of you know, I've been talking about how Generation Z is overprotected and adults have done too much to limit you and to constrain you. And so I was just looking back, you know, preparing for this and realizing, I guess I first met you, Kyle, about 2 years ago to find out what you were doing. Just blew my mind. It was wonderful. And then I guess I met Roj Karma about almost exactly 3 years ago today. When he was founding BridgeUSA. So this is really fun for me to see what your generation is actually doing about this problem.
Awesome. So I want to get some things out the way, right? So straight from the jump, I've told Jon that I want this to be more of a conversation, more than a presentation or a lecture, right? So feel free to ask any questions that you want to ask Jon. Also, we're going to, in terms of structure, we're going to ask 6 questions. 3 of them will be COVID related. 3 of them will be learning about Jon the person. My goal here is not only to have a conversation with Jon Haidt the academic, but also Jon Haidt the person. So yeah, so in the name of that, I'm going to ask the first question. And Jon, my first question for you is, what is the most expensive thing you've ever stolen?
The most expensive thing I've ever stolen. Oh man! And here I'm an ethics professor, and this is being recorded, so I guess I better be careful. Gosh, I mean, when I think back to my shoplifting days, of which there were only about 4 or 5, I've always been really easily like shamed, and I get nervous when I, you know, things like that. So I remember stealing like records in the 70s. You'd buy records and they seemed expensive at the time. So I once took one out of the sleeve as though I was looking at it to make sure it wasn't scratched. And then I slipped it in to another one. And so I paid for the one and I got 2. That's the only one that comes to mind. Now, there are surely thefts of service that I've done that were like 100 times more than that, but nothing comes to mind.
And that's what, after the shame and guilt of that is what kicked off your career as an ethical professor, I'm sure.
Yeah, actually, I could even you know, it's funny. I was just thinking of one because I have kids, and you know, they leave money around and their money around, and it occurred to me like, hey, I wonder if they ever steal each other's money. And I remembered what my first time stealing, when my friend, I was like 7 years old, and my friend showed me how to steal. You just go into your mother's purse, you just open it up, and you take the money, and she doesn't know. And so I tried that on my sister, my younger sister, and she had a $5 bill, and I stole it. And she was crying, and I felt so horrible, but I couldn't admit it. And I did finally admit it to her when we were adults.
Okay, that's a wonderful answer. Moving to the next question on COVID related. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the psychological impact you think that an event like COVID-19 has on students.
Yeah, so there's a lot. Okay, this is going to have a lot of impacts on individuals, on children, on schools, on our democracy. It's going to have a lot of impacts, but it's kind of hard to predict. Like, you could tell a story either way. And so here's the hopeful story. Here's the one that I think is going to be true for a lot of young people, which is that because we're all anti-fragile. You know, some of you heard me talk about this ad nauseum, because we all need adversity in order to grow. I'll just share. I just learned this fairly recently. Trees are anti-fragile. When they did the biosphere, what was it called, the biodome, this like thing they did in the 90s to see if people could live in an enclosed space. they grew trees inside, and the trees would grow fast, but then they actually fell over before they reached adulthood, because it turns out trees need wind. The wind blows them over, and then the roots get stronger, and the structural supports get stronger where it's needed. Anyway, Gen Z was so protected. Your parents generally thought that it would be bad for you if you heard nursery rhymes that had death in them. I mean, everything bad has been stripped from your childhood. So to come face to face with a pandemic where people are dying, where your future is not as so assured, in the long run, probably will be good for most people. We need adversity in youth, and so this will probably help psychologically. The rates of depression and anxiety are so high for Gen Z that this could be a strengthening. Now, on the other hand, it depends on what's happening in your family. So if your parents are freaking out, or if you have anxiety disorders and things are happening that make you more anxious, well, then it could push you over into not quite PTSD, but it could be long-term stress that actually does damage your brain. So I don't know which effect is going to predominate. I don't know which will be more common, but there are going to be a lot of effects.
Interesting. Okay, the second question, or the third question I have for you here, Jon, is what, if anything, is too serious to be joked about?
Oh man, what is too serious to be joked about? I guess I would say that there is no, okay, given that when I was growing up, there was a musical group called the Dead Kennedys, and people would tell, Holocaust jokes and all sorts of things. I guess I would say that there is no topic under the sun that cannot eventually be joked about. But I also do believe that there are things that are sacred, and by that I mean just like psychologically, right, like right after there's a national tragedy, I'm a Durkheimian. I love this sociologist Emile Durkheim. So there are times when we're all coming together and something is sacred, and if you make a joke at that moment, like joking about 9/11 on 9/12, that is just incredibly insensitive. But someday I'm sure kids will tell 9/11 jokes.
Great answer. So then back to COVID-19. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the impact on the coming election. How do you think Gen Z should be thinking about it? How do you think they will think about it? How do you think the other generations think about it as well?
Yeah, well, let's see. Gosh, I haven't thought about it in terms of generations. I mean, in general, a national crisis or emergency pulls people together and it gives a leader a bump. And in many countries, leaders have gotten a big bump. Trump only got a couple of points, and then that's gone now. Our country is so polarized. So I guess I would look at it like this. The older generations, we really messed things up. We messed up the budget. We messed up global warming. We messed up the democracy, and we're passing it off to you. Now we're stuck in our ways. We're stuck in our polarized ways. And I'm hopeful that at a certain point, people get exhausted, especially with the fights of the older generation. So I'm hopeful that, especially if things get really bad, which is possible, if things get really bad, either economically or socially, that Gen Z and millennials will react kind of the way the Europeans did after the hundreds of years of war over religion, which is, we got to just stop this. This is just crazy. This is exhausting. This is stupid. So I'm sure this will have a lot of effects on the election itself. I hope that the younger generations will realize you're fighting. It's like you're playing a game or fighting a battle on a ship that's sinking. And at a certain point, you got to stop fighting each other and say, okay, we have to have politics. There is a game there, but we also got to fix the ship. So that's what I hope. That's the effect I hope this will have on your generation.
Great answer. Okay, so I'm going to ask another FreeIC question here. And the question is, Jon, if a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, the future, or anything else, what would you want to know?
Oh man, I guess right now I'd want to know the true antibody rate in the United States and in New York City. No, I guess we just got some numbers about that today, which look pretty good, meaning a high number, which is what you want to see. No, but that is an incredibly tough question, because of course I'd love to know the future so that I could invest my money in ways that would make billions of dollars, which would allow me to endow every possible cause that I could ever want to endow. But that's a cheap, stupid answer. As you ask me that question, I'm feeling like a little bit of fear, because part of me says, I want to know, like, when will I die? Like, no, I don't want to know that. So, man, is that a good question? And man, is this a bad answer? I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Okay. We'll let you off the hook there. Let me come back to COVID one more time. What do you think, how do you think this will change the demand on future leaders, an event like this?
Well, democracies are strange things, because, you said demand on future leaders. It's almost as though it's like a market. And one thing I've learned being in a business school is that the world of business behaves a lot like the world of nature and evolution, with variation and selection, and what works gets more common. But the world of politics and bureaucracy doesn't work anything like that. And that's how we can get bad leaders. That's how countries can descend into polarization cycles that destroy them. So what effect will it have on future leaders? Okay, here's one. There was an interesting article in Bloomberg today about how governments must play a central role as risk protectors. Democracies are really bad at preparing for future risks. The people don't vote for people to spend money to, spend about avoiding some risk that might never happen. So governments need to just do it anyway, even though the people aren't demanding it. And so I'm hopeful that there will be more a sense that the government has to manage risk and handle some big things that markets can't handle. This is where I think the left-right debate is most productive, because if you let the right run everything, it'll have predictable blind spots and errors. And if you let the left run everything, same thing. So you have to have this nice tension between those who want more and less government, but then you have to break out at just the more or less. And you have to say, well, no, what is it that only government can do? Or what is it that government can do better than markets?
Great answer. I have one FreeIC question before I open it up to the room. So if anyone has questions, please be prepared to ask them soon. My question for you, Jon, is what is something someone said that forever changed the way you think?
Oh boy, so something someone said that forever changed the way I think. There are lots of stories I can tell, and some are just purely intellectual. It wouldn't be as interesting.
While you think of that, I have a good one from my mother.
Okay, you go.
My mother one time told me, she said, Kyle, I have to love you. I don't have to like you. And I was so young, and it just shattered my mind, because I was like, wow, I want my mom to love me and like me, right?
Yeah, but that's sort of, that's like, were you 12, 13, or 14 at the time?
I was probably like 14, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's, kids are lovable, adult children are lovable. It was a temporary thing. Let's see, what can I get off the hook here? Because I'm not thinking.
Even if it's intellectual.
Yeah, let's see. Something someone said. I mean, there's so many books I can point to that where I was like jumping up and down, like feeling my mind change. And I'm sure that happened in lectures too in college. That's part of what I look back on so fondly about college. But you're asking me like a moment, and that would be really cool to have like an epiphany moment from something someone said.
Or even if there's something from your lectures or book that stand out that you can think that was one of these jumping up and down moments.
Oh man, this is such a good question, and nothing's coming to mind. Just give me a few more minutes. I'll by the end of the hour, I'll try to come up with something.
Okay, so we want to open it up to the floor for anyone who has a question. How we're going to do this, I think, given the room size, I think we can manage. I want to have you unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and ask your question, and we'll go that way for now.
Oh yeah, we can do gallery view. There's not too many people that we can actually do gallery view and see everybody.
Yeah. Or we can use the raise hand feature on Zoom. Justin Heywood.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, hear you well.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Justin Heywood. I am a senior about to graduate at Arizona State University, and I'm the outgoing president of BridgeUSA. But my question I had for you, and I know we're with a number of organizations that are kind of doing work in this space, but I just finished my undergraduate thesis, actually using your survey, the Campus Expression Survey, and
Oh, good.
Yeah, I got about 100 or 450 students at ASU to fill it out. And ASU is pretty well off in terms of free speech. We've adopted the Chicago principles. We have a number of Heterodox Academy professors, and we even have a chapter of Bridge ASU. But I was dismayed to find that we actually were pretty, I know there's been studies done at UNC, as well as other colleges, and when I was comparing sort of the level of reluctance sharing your views in classrooms, it remained relatively the same across other universities, with a lot worse policies and procedures. So I was wondering if you think that the state of free speech on college campuses is getting better or worse, and what policies per se should we implement to kind of stave those off?
Okay, no, great question. First, tell me, so you're saying so for those who don't know, the Campus Expression Survey is something we created at Heterodox Academy. Sean Stevens and I did the initial draft with some other HXA members. And the idea was to ask a bunch of questions that would be able to allow us to assess who was afraid of speaking up about which topics, like race, gender, religion, politics, and why. What are they afraid of? Because we needed, because there's all this talk about this, speech crisis on campus, but we're academics. We said, well, let's have data, not anecdotes. So that's what that is. So you're telling me that the reluctance to speak up in a seminar class are similar to what you see at other schools?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, next tell me about the left-right divide, or male-female or black-white, because one of the most important things with the Campus Expression Survey is who is afraid to speak up. And while we created it because we had we were hearing reports that people on the right, or even, people on the right were saying, I'm afraid to talk about things, and people on the left are saying, oh no, I can speak up. I mean, that was the thing we created to measure specifically, but we also wanted to look at, if it's the case that men feel free to speak up and women don't, or whites feel free to speak up and African Americans don't, well, that's really bad too. So tell me about your discrepancies. Did you find any those differences?
Yeah, so we found that men were typically more uncomfortable sharing their views. At least we modified it just due to survey length. We cut out some of the main topic issues. But for controversial issues on politics, men typically were more unlikely to share their views than females. And then for race, our data, unfortunately, our sample sizes were pretty small, so it was hard to kind of extrapolate too much. But for African Americans, they were typically a lot more uncomfortable than white students, as well as Hispanic and Latino students were also more reluctant to speak.
Okay, well, good. I mean, I'm glad to hear that at least the tool was useful and it points to you. And were you able to share this with administrators or professors? Because that's the sort of data that they need to know and they probably don't know.
Yeah, and that's actually how we collected our samples. We sent it out to hundreds of professors trying to get some more data on it. And a lot of them they thought it would be informational for how they, lectured, or just important for that, so.
Okay, good. No, okay, I'm glad to hear that. So is the state on campus getting better or worse? I don't know I can't say that I don't know the trends for sure. We don't have good data on free speech from before 2015. In 2015, beginning at Yale, everything blew up, and that's when we founded Heterodox Academy right around then as well. And there's a lot of data that begins around 2016, 2017, like Knight Foundation and Gallup, but nothing goes back before then. The trend since then, what I've seen is sometimes a little up, sometimes a little down, but not like getting much better, not getting much worse. So that's all I know about what little national data I've seen. Part of what might be going on is that more than ever before in history, young people are having the same experience wherever they are. And so to some extent, because life on social media is often similar, and because news is nationalized, so regional differences that you might have expected, I think they're still there. I'm sure they're still there to some extent, but they might be less than in the past. What did people say they were afraid of? That's the next thing to look at. Where the question is usually, are they more afraid of that professors will give them a bad grade or criticize them, or are they more afraid of other students?
We found largely along your other studies findings that they were more afraid of students rather than professors.
Yeah, that's what we always find, actually. So this is really sad, and especially, so look, as you know, those of you who are in Bridge or in FreeIC, most people, young people, most Gen Z, most millennials, most people are pretty reasonable and enjoy having conversations. And some of you know about the Hidden Tribes study, this wonderful study done by More in Common, breaks America into 7, they use a bunch of questions, 7 different, from cluster analysis, they find 7 different groups of people. The 2 extreme groups are the ones that are really intimidating everyone, but most people are in the exhausted majority. So if it's true that that ASU students are mostly afraid of each other, well, that's all the more reason why Bridge and other groups can be so effective. There's a strategy in psychology, what's it called now, where people, it was done in like the 70s and 80s when it was, people drank a lot. Maybe they still do, but it was in which people assumed that everybody is drinking, but in fact, most people aren't getting drunk every week. And so just making the norms clear, like people are people might be assuming that they'll be jumped on. They might be assuming that most people have these attitudes and they don't realize, actually, no, most people want to have a conversation if you do it right. So I would, I think ASU is about as hospitable a university as you're going to find. It is. Deb Mashik and I wrote an essay on 10 schools that we know are at least doing a good job in terms of leadership. And so, yeah, you got your work cut out for you. And I would say just ramp up, just, more programs, bring in more people, and make it really visible that this is the norm, not freaking out about what somebody said.
Cool.
Thank you.
Move to the next question here. Sam 4. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
Oh, Sam.
Exactly right. Yeah. Hi, John. Thanks so much for doing this.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. So I am the founder and outgoing president of BridgeUSA, University of Rhode Island. And as you know, a couple years back, I interned with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. Great internship. Really launched me into this sphere, which has been quite the blessing, the other side of the coin of, I think, proper First Amendment advocacy. So I have a question that has more to do with kind of the constitutionality of the righteous mind thesis. So I'm doing my honors project right now on what I'm terming the problem of asymmetry. So the Establishment Clause has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to prohibit public educators from advancing their religious beliefs in the classroom. But of course, the Establishment Clause only applies to religion and not politics and not ideology. But the language that the court uses, according to my analysis of the rulings that the Supreme Court has taken up and ruled on the matter of Establishment Clause in public schools, really resembles the fact that there's no meaningful difference between why politics and ideology and religion should not be advanced in a public educational setting. And so I'm wondering if you think that it would be proper for some body of government, whether it's the Supreme Court, whether it is education committees, whether it's the state, to resolve this problem of asymmetry and prohibit public educators from advancing or denigrating their political views, ideological views in the classroom as well. What implications this might have on constructive dialogue, what implications this might have on the students feeling like they are feeling comfortable to share their views in a constructive manner, and other things as well. How would that affect that? Do you support such legislation?
Yeah, that's an interesting strategy, because yes, we do treat religion as something special and different. And I believe, I'm not an historian, but I believe that is a result specifically of those wars of religion that Europeans decided, not because they were so tolerant and loving, but they were just so exhausted. They just said, okay, look, we got to stop, we got to just not fight over religion. And maybe we'll get there someday over politics. But I think what you're suggesting is that we would treat political speech, we would put limits on political speech in various contexts, equating it with religious speech as though it was the establishment of a state religion. That strikes me as a very risky strategy, one that would raise a lot of red flags among libertarians and, I would guess, people at FIRE. I don't know. I would suggest a different approach. I would suggest appealing more towards norms of professional responsibility and maybe even something akin to fiduciary duty. What I mean by that is that, so now that I teach in a business school, I teach our basic course in professional responsibility, and I kind of look over at like doctors and lawyers who have guilds and an oath, and they can really have a guild, and they can expel people. And in business, you can't do that. Well, academics we have a guild, and we have high norms, and we have a noble purpose. So we should be able to function like that. And if you think about it this way, so I'm a professor, and if I assign my books because I want to make money off of my students, and that's the only reason I assign my books, I should be fired, because for me to exploit my students for my financial benefit is an incredible violation of my professional identity and responsibility and guild. Or if I were to admit students to my class or do things in order to seduce the ones I was attracted to, I should be fired on the spot. That would be an abuse of my authority. That would be violating my duty to educate and to care for my students in terms of their education. So that's unthinkable. You'd be fired on the spot. Well, what if I were to recruit my students for my political projects? I'm very concerned about the far left or the far right, or the rainforest or taxes, anything. If I was to teach my courses so as to bring my students to have them help me in my political projects, I should be fired on the spot. At least that's the argument. That's the argument I think might be a better argument for you. That's one that I'm thinking of trying to develop, because that happens all the time. And to appeal to a notion of professionalism, I think it raises many fewer red flags. It's uplifting rather than sort of like, I'm going to use the Constitution to beat you up. So I would go that way. And if you look, I think it's the Teachers Guild or something. There's some code of ethics that high school or K through 12 teachers have that says very explicitly that they must not proselytize. They must not use their talk about politics or get their students. So that's often already in there. That's the way I would go.
Hey, I'm gonna chime in real quickly here. I know that we have some people watching on the Facebook live stream. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in there. We will ask those as well. I'm actually gonna take about like 2 or 3 of them for you, John, here. We have a question from Jacob Wu, and the question is, do you think when all of this is over, campus atmosphere will be more polarized than before or less polarized?
And by this, I assume you mean the COVID crisis.
I think that's what is.
Yeah, that's one of those questions where it really could go either way. If you asked me this a week or 2 ago, I was generally optimistic. I think this is going to push a lot of reset buttons, and people are going to be, this is going to force us all to stop taking things for granted. And like my kids are going to actually love going back to school whenever they can. Like there's all sorts of things we're just going to be so glad to be able to do. So in general, I would predict good things to come from this. And I think in a lot of other countries, it will be mostly good. Now, once we now have these lockdown protests, the anti-lockdown protests, and okay, we can talk about politics here as long as we understand there's no malice. I mean, when Donald Trump tweeted, liberate Virginia, liberate Minnesota, I rarely criticize him in public. I don't just, I only speak up if I think he's really done something that especially impacts like the areas that I study and care about. And since polarization is one of them, to make the response to the virus, a political litmus test, I thought was very bad leadership. So now that the response to the virus itself is a marker of your political identity, I'm much less hopeful. Now that's true for the nation at large. Will that play out on college campuses the same way? That I don't know. I do think our vast democracy is just ripe for fighting. But on a college campus, you have a real chance to have a superordinate identity. And this is like social psych 101. The superordinate identity, the more you emphasize that, the more you can handle difference within, grow from it, and actually like people. So I'm hopeful that good leaders, both at the administrative level on campus and also student leaders, are going to really ramp up the in-group identity of the university or the college, because that's when it's not exclusive. It's not like us versus them. It really is like a draw a larger circle around it. So with good leadership, I think probably the effects will be beneficial. My guess is a lot of the identity politics stuff that, it seems as though there's, fighting over ever smaller transgressions. That I haven't seen as much of that on Twitter recently. A lot of people have commented on this. So I think we might have, our arguments might be about more like larger policy issues, which would be refreshing.
Cool. I have another question for you from Joe Guarneri, I believe. The question is, mental health issues in adolescents and specifically college students have risen in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic is likely to exacerbate this. Yet universities are tightening their budgets, meaning they won't be able to hire additional mental health counselors. Could this cause a crisis of some sort?
So again, that's one of the things that could go either way. It's for those who already have anxiety issues, and if they're sequestered alone, there are certainly, I have not seen any data on whether mental health is getting better or worse, because normally what happens when, what's long been known is if you try to bomb people into submission from airplanes, suicides go down, depression does not go up, it goes down. Crises tend to bring people together. Depression is not, oh, my future looks dark. Depression is much more, I'm alone and nobody loves me. And so if people are quarantined in certain ways, yes, there are surely a lot of people whose mental health issues are getting worse. But it's possible, it's quite possible that on average, college students' anxiety and depression levels are down. I don't know that that's the case. We need to be looking out for data. So I would just say, we can't make assumptions here. We do need to get data, and I think the effects are going to be very mixed. There's a famous study, I need to read it again. I read it long ago, called "Children of the Great Depression." And the general find it's about kids who were, when the Great Depression it would happen, and people who were in their 30s when the Depression hit often were broken by it. But if crisis or tragedy or bad things happen in your teens and 20s, that's the best age to grow from. That's where you get the most growth effects. So I think there are going to be lots of different courses through this. It could be that rates of depression and anxiety have been going up so fast. Well, maybe I'll pull up some graphs. They're in my books. Oh, if you go to thecoddling.com and you click on solutions, better mental health, I've got lit reviews showing it's unbelievable what has happened since 2012 to not just in America, it's in Canada, UK, a lot of other countries. So, I might say things couldn't get much worse. They can always get worse, but it is possible that actually rates will begin to come down once we get through the rough part. That they'll come down like lower than they were over the last few years. That's possible.
Got it. We have another question from someone in here, Ross Irwin. So I'll let Ross unmute himself and ask.
Hello. So kind of off that last point, and I'm sorry, John, we're asking you a lot of questions that require some more clairvoyance than maybe you have access to at this point. But I was wondering, kind of, as far as mental fragility or resilience, right? What kind of time horizons change the way we react to stressors like this? Because I'm thinking, if we're in quarantine for a month, then I don't think really anything changes. But if we're in quarantine for a year, do we start to significantly change norms and hygiene practices and those types of things?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the time horizon. So let's talk about different kinds of change. So one kind of change, the main kind of change we're talking about here is changes in your automatic mental processes. So many of you have taken a psychology course. If you remember behaviorism, you know, you give rewards and punishments. And so you can't train an animal, you know, just in a, well, actually, okay, B.F. Skinner can train a pigeon in 5 minutes. Actually, you can, with operating condition, you can actually get behavior change pretty quickly. But in a lot of my books, I talk about the mind is divided like a rider on an elephant. The rider is our conscious reasoning. The elephant is the automatic processes. So that does tend to take, you know, a month or two to change habits that stick. So we're talking several months. But there can be changes that happen in an instant, and those are those epiphanies that Kyle was asking me to remember. There are epiphanies, there are drug experiences, there are spontaneous peak experiences, there are moments of trauma, and there are moments of joy and awe. So changes can happen. Changes can happen quickly. They also can happen in the stories that we tell. So the story that we each have our own personal narrative, and all of you now have a major obstacle in your personal narrative. Not all, maybe some of you are fine with all this, but certainly your job prospects are darker now than they were a few months ago. So the story that you tell about yourself, that can change permanently, and that can change pretty quickly. And so I just want to share, here's just one thought. Something I was thinking this morning. Studies of happiness people used to think happiness is the total number of minutes that you had happy. You added up over your life. If you had more minutes, you were happier. But that view was quickly abandoned because it turns out people don't just want the maximum happiness. They want a really good life story. And you tell me which you'd rather have. Here's the story of my parents' generation. My mother, for example, was born in 1931. In the depths of the Depression. That's all she knew when she was a kid, was the Depression, and then the war and the Holocaust. And then things got better and better, and America had a glorious 20th century, and my parents were, you know, they were born poor, but they were successful. And what, you know, everything, you know, what an amazing, amazing story. And as my mother was dying in 2017, she was very aware that as she saw the country was going to hell, and a lot of the things that you know, that we loved about America. I mean, she taught me, my mother told me, America is the promised land for the Jews. It's not Israel, it's America. And my mother raised me to be very patriotic. And what she saw happening as she was dying was a tragic story, she thought. Now compare that to your story. Many of you, I guess some of you remember the financial crisis, but it probably didn't matter much to you when you were kids. And then the 2010s kind of sucked. I mean, like, this was a really bad decade, and it's getting, you know, and now it's really, really, I mean, it ends with a pandemic. You can't, you know, you can't make this stuff up. So you have this incredible obstacle. You have all this bad stuff in your childhood. Your expectations have been brought way down. Now, odds are things are going to get a lot better. You know, just if you're depressed, read Steven Pinker, read Matt Ridley, The Rational Optimist. It's always been wrong to bet against America. It's always been wrong to bet against humanity. We're going to get through this, and things might get worse, but then they're going to get better. So at least you might end up having a fantastic life story and national story. So, you know, I just think about it. Yeah, I just think about it that way, that there's your question was actually about change. And I kind of went off on this like thought that I was just, but don't just think about like yourself as a behaviorist creature, which you are. You're also a meaning making creature, and you're part of a generation that is doing meaning making. And so if you don't get bitter, so it's possible that your generation will just get, you know, bitter and we're victims and we never got a chance. And, you know, that would be a story that would be self-handicapping. But if you're the generation that comes together to solve these problems and to say enough is enough, we've got to fix our institutions, we've got to have a better safety net, we've got to have more opportunity, you know, whatever it is. If you're the generation that does that, what a glorious life.
Cool, thank you.
Jon, I'm gonna throw a FreeIC question here just to change pace a little bit.
Okay.
The question I have for you is, what is something you hate that you wish you loved, and why?
Oh, something I hate that I wish I loved. Well, that's easy. It would be classical music, because my wife loves classical music, and she invites me to concerts at Carnegie Hall. And she finally has, you know, realized that I was just kind of like, you know, pretending to not be bored out of my mind, and it would really help our marriage if I liked classical music, and it would also make me look more intelligent. So I wish I liked it. I like some. There are some things. Okay, I remember. So you know, great college experiences. Like you know, for some reason I just audited a classical music class at Yale, and Beethoven's Seventh. Like I'd never heard of it, but the the professor put it on in this big auditorium with loudspeakers, and like that was where I remember that to this day. Like that was one of the great moments in my college education.
Wonderful. I wouldn't have guessed that you hated classical music, but good to
Well,
know.
yeah, you know, especially when there's like just like lots of silence. You're like where are the notes? Like what's happening?
Question for you from Facebook from Mark Urista. You've spoken extensively about the impact of social media and screen time on Gen Z. What kind of impact do you think the expansion of online classes will have on college students?
Yeah. Oh, first, hi, Mark. Glad to hear you're on the call. Um, what? Let's see. What? Okay. So the online. That's a good question. So first, you know, it is possible that social media is changing. Actually, this is something. Okay, I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask the group here whether social media is changing in your experience during this. So I'll just focus on the question about online courses. It's one of those things that could go either way. One thing that I and everybody else, many of us who are professors, fear is that the economics of higher ed was already in bad shape, and we were very dependent on Chinese exchange students and foreign students to keep enrollments up and to pay full fare. And if students now get even more adept at learning on their own, and they discover, hey, you know, between Khan Academy and Coursera, you know, why bother coming to campus? You know, I suppose, okay, I can be afraid of that as a professor. That would be selfish. So it's possible that there will be a lot more independent learning. That could be great, actually. In terms of, let's see, that would be good. Now, what would be bad? It's also possible that people will, that this could be a real wake-up call. In fact, we just had this conversation in my department. It was, okay, given that we all now see that we can do this online, and it's not as good, none of us like it as much, but this really puts the pressure on us to now, like, okay, how do you really take maximum advantage of our time, our time interacting? And so we're going to try to learn to do less lecturing and more more intelligent conversation. So I think this is going to be valuable as a real kick, like question what you're doing, and really try to make the most of the online format, and then make the most when you're together in the classroom. So I think some good will come of it. But Mark, what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I know that Mark's on Facebook chat, so we'll give him a little bit time to answer that. And
I see.
Yeah,
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Hi, John. Good to see you.
You too.
My biggest concern is about the social interaction. I've discovered, as I'm sure you have over your many years of teaching, that learning very rarely occurs in isolation. And I know the social interaction typically increases engagement at my community college. Yeah. And I'm concerned that we're just not seeing that at the same levels that we typically do in the classroom. And to be frank, I think that the students that I have in my classes right now just aren't learning as much as they did when we were face to face.
Okay, yes, I see that. I think you're probably right that that is happening. So this is a perfect chance for us to kick this back to the current college students who are on here. So one thing I remember, was a Canadian student emailed me something after reading The Coddling the American Mind, and he said, you know, I come into class and we're all on our phones, waiting for the professor to start. We don't talk to each other. We sit there on our phones. Mm-hmm. And I hear this a lot. And this has always been true, that you know, and this is actually a nice demonstration to do. In a class, you say, do you feel that you want to have more contact? You want to have more conversations with the people sitting around you, or you know, or not? And what do you think they want? Well, it turns out almost everybody's craving more interaction. And I think that's even more true now for Gen Z. So I think you're right to worry about that. So let me ask the current college students here. First of all, do you think it's true that when you're on campus, people are not connecting enough? There's a reluctance to talk or to meet. Everybody's on their phones. That's the first question. actually, wait, can we do voting here? Can we do, well, reaction? Wait, is that, how do we do that? No, it's not reactions.
We can do yes and no.
Okay, yeah, can you, let's try it. If you can, whoever's running the poll, can just do a poll here. So overall, so here's the first question for you. Overall, do you think that college students on campus wish that they could have a lot more interaction? They're shy or they're limited. They want more direct interaction. So say yes or no. And wait, how do you respond to that? Is it under the? Oh, I don't see where I would respond to that. To participants. Got it. Yeah, I see it's participant. 10 yeses and 0 no's.
Yep.
Okay. Now, what do you think is happening now that everybody's remote? Do you think that there's even more that's kind of an obvious question, I guess. Although I guess people are, okay, well, no, it's not, because Gen Z is comfortable connecting electronically. Overall, do you think that people feel more isolated or less? Just current college students.
Yes for more isolated, no for less.
That's right. Okay. Yes, everybody's saying yes. Okay. So yes, Mark, I think this is a problem. And I think you're right that I was just thinking about like the loneliness and the mental health effects. You're talking about the learning effects. Yeah, and my God, I see it with my kids. My kids are 10 and 13. They're New York City public schools. You know, they have like an hour of stuff online, but it's very hard for them to like learn just on their own when they're not, you know, when they're just alone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Next question is for Noah, who has his hand raised here. Noah, can you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Hi, John. My name is Noah Jeanette. I'm the Vice President of the University of Pittsburgh chapter of Bridge. And my question is, one of the things I've noticed a lot on my campus is, and with dealing with people both in the classroom and in kind of, you know, extracurricular discussions about, you know, religion or politics or, you know, these kind of sensitive issues, is this kind of sense of apathy that's kind of in some ways related to identity. Like people will not want to talk about certain things because they assume that because of the group they're in that they shouldn't talk about them, whether that comes from a religious perspective, a racial perspective, gender, you know, whatever it is. But at the same time, people seem frustrated that these conversations aren't happening, and then get, like, I think what you were kind of mentioned earlier is a little bitter, right, about the kind of, you know, the environment that they're in, and then just refuse to engage even more and just kind of get into a vicious cycle of apathy where they just kind of retract from the conversation to a greater and greater degree and get more and more disillusioned. So I was wondering if you had any comments or strategies on kind of like how to break that kind of cycle of apathy and how to get people, you know, more engaged and stop from kind of regressing.
Okay, well, so first I'd ask you, let's diagnose this precisely if we can. Is it apathy, meaning they just don't care? Or is it fear that they will be, you know, humiliated or attacked or called racist or sexist or something? So is it apathy? Is it fear? What exactly is holding them back? Or is it something else?
I would say that it probably depends on the person, but I think it's a little bit of both, right? Like they don't want to be judged, but at the same time, maybe apathy isn't quite the right word. Maybe it's disillusionment, right? That they don't think that it will, you know, that what they have to say or that their opinion really matters or that it'll really change anything that's worth having that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's good. Disillusionment, maybe some bitterness. And I do see this. I see it sometimes in African-American students who are just tired of having to say the same things over and explain the same things over and again. I see it in white boys, especially the white males like in high school, who I've spoken to a number of private schools, and they say like, you know, we're blamed for everything. We're told we're bad. Everybody else is good. We're bad. And that I think actually makes them recruitable by you know, Nazi groups even. So I do see that a lot of people, and we see, and the CES, on the Campus Expression Survey, one thing we learned is that I think conservative women and conservative African Americans, I think, both were really reluctant to speak up, because if they actually gave their views, they would be attacked by, the sort of the politically different members of their identity group. So there are a lot of different reasons why people feel bitter from long bad experience of being attacked. And bad is stronger than good. So being attacked or shamed publicly once or twice is going to change your behavior in a way that having a great conversation 5 times, maybe they would balance out, maybe not even. So it's hard. We do have to change norms. I think that one of the master skills. Okay, here's what I know. Actually, no, we're not. What time do we end? We still have a half hour. Is that right? What time do we end?
About a half hour.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. So one of the most important skills that I can recommend to your generation, to people who are going to be applying for jobs, is the ability to be forgiving, easygoing, charitable, give people the benefit of the doubt. This is a truly employable skill. And where I'm coming from on this is this. I'm in a business school. I talk to a lot of people in business. And in the last year or two, since Gen Z has been on the job market and entering the corporate world, people are telling me things like, what the hell is happening? It's like some of them come in looking for conflict, or it's like somebody said something and now it's weeks of turmoil because somebody told a joke or wore a t-shirt. Like, what the hell is happening? And so I think employers are getting very frustrated with the moralism, not of the majority of you, but of it's in the Hidden Tribe study, I think it's the progressive activists are the ones that we see on campus, but there are also right-wing activists as well. At any rate, your generation is getting a reputation for being more difficult to work with. Now, the millennials, we all made fun of for being, so into craft brews and coffees and, certain lifestyle things, but that was like normal intergenerational teasing. Gen Z is seen as a problem to employ, and it's the anxiety and it's the quick the freaking out thing over language. So the more you cultivate this magic ability, that Kyle has, that BridgeUSA, the more you cultivate this magic ability to just talk to anyone and not react, not get upset, but you bring an attitude of, I actually want to learn. Like, I want to hear from you. Employers are going to see that and say, wow, yeah, this person is going to actually add value to our group, not take it away. So I totally hear you on the degree to which a lot of people are exhausted or bitter, but just keep at it. Don't get bitter yourself. Develop these skills. Read Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Go to openmindplatform.org. Do the Open Mind platform. In BridgeUSA, do you guys use Open Mind? Okay. Okay, yeah, some of you do. So yeah, I urge you to try it in all your chapters. Keep cultivating the skills that you're doing. They're not just employable. They're actually what the country most needs. They're morally desperately needed. Noah, does that answer your question, or do you have any comment back?
Yeah, I think that gets the gist of it pretty well. So would you kind of characterize it as a kind of almost like compassionate dialogue then?
I guess I would characterize it as coming first from a place of moral and intellectual humility, where you realize that you don't know what the truth is, and you certainly don't know everything. And I think one thing we're learning, even especially in the sciences, is that the truth is a lot harder to get than we thought even 10 years ago. Like when I was in grad school, we learned correlational studies are often garbage, but an experiment, if it's a controlled experiment, then you know causality. Turns out that's not true. Turns out even with experiments, we often don't know, we're often wrong. And so I think it starts from that kind of place, and a mindset that says, my goal is not to beat people in petty squabbles. My goal is to learn as much as I can and make myself better and stronger and wiser. And if you come with that mindset, then you it just changes the way you interact with people. So I think that's the starting point, is the mindset that you bring.
Great answer. Emily, you've had your virtual hand raised for a long time, so please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my question kind of had to do with how maybe Gen Z living through the 2008 recession and now graduating into a recession, how this is going to affect our generation's outlook on how we view working in America, whether we take on more jobs that maybe more of our personal passions, take a pay cut to pursue those because we have lost hope in having economic stability in our lifetime, or think you'll see more influx into more secure, financially secure positions, just because I know a lot of my friends have had parents lose their jobs twice now. So I'm just curious about that and what you think.
Yeah. Well, I think we can look to the World Value Survey for some guidance. So if you just Google World Value Survey, some of you may have heard of it. It's this giant survey done in, it's now to 100 countries every 7 years since the 1990s, I think, or 80s. And what they've learned is that as countries become prosperous, basically, if you're safe and prosperous, if you remove existential threats, you don't have to worry about finding food, next week. Values shift in only one direction. Values in all these countries, and so like take Korea or any of the countries that like made from poverty to upper middle class in a generation or two, the values all move the same way. The next generation cares more about women's rights, human rights, gay rights, environment, animal rights, self-fulfillment. They have what are the values called? Self-expressive values. And so that actually, in a sense, reached its peak with the millennials. So the millennials really had self-expressive values, and they weren't going to put in their time and work hard for 5 years to get to where they want to be. Like, no, I want this, this job must express my values all the time. And so I think we reached the peak with the millennials. And even before the pandemic, brand companies that do marketing were trying to understand Gen Z, and they were already saying Gen Z wants more security, raised with the financial crisis and not quite the expectations. So given, and I don't know if it's from the economic situation or from the higher levels of anxiety. I don't know what, but given the anxiety levels that were already there, my guess is we might see a shift backwards on this dimension. The only place we've seen that before is in Eastern Europe and Russia. In Eastern Europe and Russia, they had such economic catastrophe for 20 years that you actually saw values moving in a retrograde way in that sense. Now, it's not going to, this is not going to go on for 10 or 20 years here, I don't think. I'm pretty confident it's not going to go on that long. But I think we might see a shift away from like the total self-expressive to like, I can't take things for granted. I need to have, I need to have a secure job. So I think it is going to, I think you're right to see it as a 1-2 punch. I think that is going to make your generation more realistic. Now that could end up giving us something more like a greatest generation, because it's the generation that lived through the Depression. They were the ones who were the greatest social capitalists in the last 100 years. And by that, I mean, this is I think Robert Putnam used the term, Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone. The people who created social capital, the people who joined groups, invested in their communities, they didn't put themselves first. It was a beautiful generation. And the Depression and the war are credited as being the cause of their pro-social tendencies. So yeah, it's going to affect you, and you're probably going to expect a lot less from work. And that could, that could in the long run be good. It could make you better citizens than my generation has been. It could have all kinds of effects, but I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. One of you said that you're asking me to prognosticate. It's very hard to, what Yogi Berra said, it's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future or something like that. But I can at least tell you, here's some psychological processes that are likely to be activated. That's all I can do.
Got it.
No, thank you.
John, change of pace. I got two FreeIC questions for you. First one
Okay.
is, if you could meet anyone, any person, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Oh, dead or alive? Wow. Um, well, let's see. My first thoughts, this is kind of geeky, but my first thoughts are David Hume and Adam Smith, because they are the sort of the first people who you know, I mean, just like I would say Darwin, you know, because like he's like the first person who saw evolution and, you know, gave us this, you know, expanded our thinking. And my next book is going to be about capitalism and the moral foundations of capitalism. And Adam Smith and David Hume were just the most brilliant philosophers and useful philosophers, really relevant to our day and age. So that's my geeky answer. But you know, I mean, you know, I'd love to, you know, see whether Jesus existed and Moses and like, you know, meet these people if they, you know. So I love history. I went through a Rome phase. I picked up some cassette tapes when I was teaching at the University of Virginia on a long drive, and I listened to Edward Gibbon's "To Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire." And for a year or two, I was obsessed with ancient Rome, and so I would have loved to meet, you know, Marcus Aurelius for sure. Anyway, those are some
Great
thoughts.
answers.
Not
Those are
terrible.
great answers.
Oh.
My next question for you, John, is what have you given up on?
What have I given up on? Wow. Let's see. What have I given up on? Uh, I've given up on doing things that are exciting but risky. So I've given up on things like ever riding a motorcycle again or skydiving. I'm an awe junkie. I love experiences of awe, and I've always sought them out. And I sometimes took risks that could have killed me. And then once you get married and once you have kids, then you kind of get much more, you know, much more like, okay, no more risk. So I've given up on those things, but that's not quite what you meant. What have I given up on? Um, uh, I I go through moments when I give up on America. When I look at the trends and I think this just isn't going to work. But those are temporary, and it's really just like, you know, I'll see some story or sometimes I'll just, you know, sometimes I get kind of depressed about it. But you know, then you read history and you see how bad things were in the, you know, the 1820s and, you know, 1968. My God, you want to appreciate our time. Wait, there's a video. Somebody did a video collage. How do we find it? 1968 video. Oh shoot, I'll see if I can I'll send it. 1968 video. Somebody did it, you know, because that was this incredible year of political agitation and violence, and there were multiple bombings every week in America. So you see what we've been through before, the Civil War. So I sometimes give up on America, but it's temporary.
Good answer. So I'm going to pull a question from Facebook. We have Elizabeth Jennings who asked, how do you respond to others shutting down controversial issues by using the virus? I.e., how dare you bring that up when people are dying in the hospital, etc. How do you not let previous concerns get buried on purpose under this new situation?
Interesting. I guess, So I guess I see conversations as people make a gambit or a bid. And just because somebody makes a bid to define what's going on doesn't mean you have to accept it. So you have to use your judgment about whether you think others around will accept that bid. And if so, then maybe you should shut up temporarily. Maybe it is inappropriate right now. But there are a lot of people who are displaying, and this is especially the problem with social media and with the generation raised on social media, is there's much more inauthentic social manipulation. So I think a kind of a gentle questioning, a gentle redefining, and saying, I mean no disrespect, but you know, if we're going to make it through as a country, we have to still have, you know, norms of civil discourse. That's kind of I mean, I don't know exactly what to say there, but I would say see people's moves as as a bid, and then you have the power to question whether that bid is appropriate. Don't just accept other people's bids. And you see this, because then what you get is called preference falsification. So on social media, one person tries to define like this as a, this is an act of racism, or this is an act of whatever. And a lot of people, most people might be thinking, no, it isn't. But nobody says anything. And if so, then the bid goes through, and then everybody learns, oh, okay, I guess that was. So I would say, just again, develop these like super duper social skills by joining Free Intelligent Conversation, and by joining BridgeUSA, and by engaging in it frequently, and that you can do it with grace. That's the challenge. Do it, like defuse a bomb with grace.
I did not pay him to say that. Scott, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I was curious, going back to a question asked earlier about whether or not you see the follow-up to the situation with COVID-19 resulting in further continuous divide or people coming together. Under the assumption that, say people do come together and we really start to work together again for however long, how enduring do you expect that to be if that does happen?
Yeah, so there is research on the effect of war and foreign attack, and generally that produces a profound and long-lasting increases in trust. Research by my friend and colleague Joe Henrich. They looked at a country in Africa. They looked at Georgia in this, Soviet ex-republic where there was war. When it happened, when kids were teenagers or young, they were more trusting for the rest of their lives. And that was again like the greatest generation thing. So war or foreign attack has powerful, long-lasting, positive effects on group solidarity. That's clear. A pandemic, you're afraid of each other. We evolved to be afraid of disease. There are sometimes shortages. We started with a toilet paper shortage. Apparently in a few weeks, we'll have a meat shortage. So these things bode badly. These things suggest that we may not come together. On the other hand, I think the overwhelming response on the ground around America is to be more cooperative, people helping. So in these early stages, I think the positive is greatly outweighing the negative. Now, in Britain, I think they're going to have a very good pandemic because they went through this incredibly divisive Brexit divide, which was not straight Tory Labour, so it scrambled things. And now they have this pandemic to sort of put them back together, and they have a queen. And there's research showing that constitutional monarchies are more stable than republics because you have a head of state who is above politics. And if you want to see a beautiful leadership speech, watch Queen Elizabeth's speech to the nation about the virus. So I think Britain is going to have a big net increase in social capital. America is going to be a lot more complicated. At the national level, at the presidential level, we're much more divided. We have this big election coming up. So a few weeks ago, I was optimistic. Now I'm back towards pessimistic, but that's at the national level. Within companies, within schools, within towns, I think we're still going to see a lot of coming together, a lot of desire for that. So I think America is going to have a very mixed pandemic, and it's going to be much more local and patchwork. The country as a whole may be worse off, but you can make the places you're in. Good leadership, good citizenship can create pockets of a lot of positivity. But what do you guys think? I'd love to hear. Does anyone have a different opinion? What do you think is going to happen? Is the long-term effect of this on our society and our civility? Any thoughts?
I guess I've seen several situations, especially regarding the development of a vaccine and the conversation around women's rights to choice and whatnot, where both far sides have kind of bashed the other about going back on their previous beliefs on the right to choice and whatnot, and people making parallels in that case. And there's sort of a paradox in that case. Obviously, they're not one-to-one. They can't really be compared. in entirety. But I think it introduces the idea that those situations aren't as simple as we generally have approached them up to this point, and that there is a paradox, and that there is more reason for us to come together and actually kind of talk about these and reason through them beyond just, what do you believe? Oh, not what I believe. Okay, we're against each other, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that gives, well, it is kind of initially forming into these like little petty arguments from what I've seen. I think it offers the opportunity to kind of be like, all right, there's clearly something that's mismatched, because both sides are having to sort of shift their perspective a little bit, and they're being forced to acknowledge that. And I think that might offer an opportunity to bring people together. But
yeah, I think we're gonna have to wait. We'll have to rely on good polling to know, because we're all in our homes. All we can see is what we see on our screens. And so if you're paying attention to social media, yeah, things look really bad. But that first poll done by More in Common showed that in general, the data was collected like 2 weeks ago. In general, Americans felt, so one of the key questions was, do you feel that we're all in this together, or that, I forget what the opposite was, but it was a pretty strong majority of both Republicans and Democrats were saying, yeah, we're all in this together. Now that might not last, but don't be discouraged by what you see on social media. Always remember that social media handed a gigantic megaphone to the extremes, and that's one of the problems in our democracy.
Wonderful. I'm going to move to the next question here. Kyle Taylor has his hand raised. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, John, thanks for being with us this evening and talking with us. I have a question about your book, The Righteous Mind, where you talk about how conservatives actually have a better understanding of how liberals think and where they're coming from, versus liberals knowing where conservatives come from, because at universities, which are largely tilted to the left, conservatives are more exposed and more challenged by liberal views, and liberals have a kind of deficit in this challenge.
Yep.
So do you see any solutions going forward in universities and how to cure this deficit?
Well, I would say BridgeUSA and Free Intelligent Conversations and Heterodox Academy. The basic finding is that the basic finding that Kyle's referring to is a study I did where Jesse Graham was the lead author. And we had people fill out the Moral Foundations questionnaire, if you go to yourmorals.org. And 1/3 were told, fill it out. 1/3 were told, pretend that you were a conservative. How would you fill it out? 1/3 were told, pretend you're a progressive or liberal. How would you fill it out? And so then we actually just see who's able to pretend to be the other side. What we found is that centrists and center-right were the most accurate. People who said they're very liberal were the least accurate by a lot. They could not pretend to be a conservative. And you see this a lot, that people who are progressive tend to be in creative industries and in cities, and so it's easy to go your whole life without really being exposed to conservative ideas. Whereas if you're a conservative, unless you have homeschooled your kids in a cave, you can't. You encounter progressive ideas, you encounter progressive media, movies, news. So this gives the right a structural advantage, not just in our democracy, in Europe as well. You rarely hear of an election in which, oh, surprise, the left did so much better than was expected. But it's often the case that the right does better than expected, because the left just has a lot of trouble understanding or imagining the other side. So, my view, something I tried to say when I was running Heterodox Academy, is that if you're a partisan left person, and what you want is ultimately to be successful politically, you should want viewpoint diversity, because it's going to make your people smarter. And I urge you all to watch this with a wonderful Van Jones video that I show every chance I get. If you Google Van Jones excellent metaphors, it's a brilliant 3-minute talk at the University of Chicago on, he says, I don't want you to be safe emotionally. I don't want you to be safe ideologically. I want you to be strong. And he talks about how he wants college students to engage with their opponents. So it would seem to be in progressive people's self-interest to push themselves and younger progressives to engage. It would make them more effective politically. But as you know from the Righteous Mind, we're not really rationally pursuing our long-term self-interest. We're much more concerned about what people think of us now, and not everybody, but key people. So we're much more interested in showing off what a great team member we are, even if that hurts our team.
Wonderful. I'm gonna, Jessica, have your virtual hand raised for quite some time. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, hi.
Hello,
I
Jessica.
question actually goes off a little bit of Scott's, but I had a question kind of surrounding coronavirus is for Gen Z, we've seen our parents like lose their jobs or possibly lose their jobs twice now, back in 2008 and then now. When this first stimulus package was passed a couple weeks ago, they forgot like a lot of college students that were claimed by their parents. And then one of the big things leading up for this election was a lot of talk about like healthcare reform and all of that, which kind of I think we're being faced with now, where it's like, oh my gosh, we do need something to kind of change. My question is, do you think that Gen Z, because of like all of these and other ones, will make decisions going forward out of anger or with the intent of like working together and finding a common solution?
That's a great question. Okay, I'll just share my, I have limited exposure to Gen Z, and that at NYU I teach mostly MBA students, and I've met, I've been speaking about the book, so I've spoken with, and every place I go, I'll have lunch with students and have meetings with them, and my own kids are Gen Z, but they're younger, they're 10 and 13, and so let me just share my thought. You tell me if you think this is right. That overall, I'd say Gen Z seems really sweet and not angry, more anxious, and not at all in denial. That is, I've always found that when I give a talk and I say, here's what I think happened, and here are the mental health things, and here's the overprotection, and it's a kind of an unflattering picture. There's no blame, but it is an unflattering picture. And then I say, do you think this was basically right or wrong? And 100% of the Gen Z students say, yes, this was right. Like this is what's happened to our generation. So my sense is that Gen Z is not in denial, not angry, anxious, a little confused about the future, but wanting to do better and wanting to get stronger and wanting to learn and wanting to reach out and wanting to grow and flower and be successful. So I actually have a lot of hope, and I don't see them being a revolutionary generation full of anger. Now, we've seen the activists on campus, there are, of course. And then obviously, again, there's the extremists on both sides are active, and then each side has its own pathologies. They're not symmetrical. So that's my thought, just more from what I've seen like on campuses. But you tell me, do you think they're going to react with anger, with resignation, or with sort of pragmatism and like, buckle down and fix this? What do you think?
Honestly, I'm not really sure, just because I know somebody, maybe it was you were mentioning social media earlier, like there's a lot of, it's kind of like a different world on social media where in my opinion, I kind of take that as people are more angry at the other side for not understanding them. So it's kind of like I could see where decisions would be made going forward out of spite, I think. However, like all of my involvement, because I'm at the Bridge USA at ASU chapter, it kind of gives me like a lot of hope, I think, because there are so many people willing to listen to each other and understand. So I'm not sure.
If you compare it to the baby boomers in the 60s, I was born in 1963, so I have no recollection of the hippie era. But there was, again, a lot of violence. Like people planned, there were terrorist groups, there were kidnappings, murders. There was, the thought was armed revolution. We must have armed revolution. And there's no hint of that today that I see. So, however bad things are socially, at least violence has come way, way, way down, as Steve Pinker pointed out for a long time, way, way, way down. And now as things are getting worse, it's not really going up. So, that is something to be hopeful about.
I think we have time. Maybe we'll do 3 questions here, right? I see Trevor has his hand raised. Trevor, you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask quickly, how do you think you should go about, as a lot of us are entering the workforce, with a lot of things on social media, such as like cancel culture, to express sometimes controversial opinions with the fear of losing our job or having other external social repercussions that we can't account for?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, it's kind of weird that throughout my life, we've removed all these risks. We've removed, you're not going to like step in a pothole and fall down into a giant hole. Like, whereas in developing countries I've been in, that can happen. But, we've removed all these risks, this physical risk, but yet, you guys can destroy your lives with one careless tweet, or somebody can destroy it for you without you even doing anything wrong. So, I think in general, you're probably best advised to just stay off as much as you can. And see it as a snake pit and a cesspool for the most part. The platforms are different. That's not true of all the platforms, but I would certainly say be careful, be wary of it. Now, it does also offer lots of opportunities to do positive things, lots of opportunities to celebrate people and praise them and do nice things. So I'm no master at that. I try to do that sometimes on Twitter, but Twitter's the worst of them all overall. So I don't have, don't look to me for overall advice on how to be skillful on social media, except to say be really careful. And social media is really a good reason to read the Stoics and the Buddhists, because it's hard enough to go through life as a human being with all these, people say things about you, bad things happen. Well, now with social media, that can happen 10 times or 50 times as much as it used to. And so I think developing some inner calmness, some ability to distance yourself from petty squabbles, from stupid little things, is a life skill.
I guess I mean also in the sense of, like, for example, Jeff Bezos says something personally, and then a lot of people find it and attack him on social media, and then like you have something like boycott Starbucks or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So these things I feel like can happen off of social media as well. Now that we have like a hyper connected culture, so I think that I try my best to have social media.
If you're famous, if you're rich, if you're in the public eye, then yes, you can't escape it. But if not, then you can. And just always remember, it's not just that it's not the real world. It's its own world. And and there's debate on this. I mean, I have an article in the Atlantic from last November. If you just look up haywire democracy, I think I lay out with Tobias Rose-Stockwell exactly how social media changed to become an outrage machine, why I think it's so bad for democracy. And it was when I worked that out about a year ago that I cut my time on Twitter by about 80%. I'm rarely on it now.
Thank you.
A related question that came from Cody Ann Baker on Facebook. What are your suggestions for dealing with loved ones or friends who use social media as a cry for help, either by making belligerent posts espousing polarized views, making threats of withholding friendship from people who don't agree with them, or even threatening self-harm? Any tips for discerning between an individual who is genuinely crying for help versus an individual who is being emotionally and psychologically abusive?
Oh man, that is an important question, and it's one that I have no expertise in. First, because I'm not a clinical psychologist. Second, because I'm not on Instagram or Facebook. I'm just a little bit on Twitter. So I'd hate to give advice on such an important question, except just to say that I'm sorry, who was the person who asked the question? What's her name?
Cody Ann Baker.
Cody? Okay. Just that clearly Cody recognizes that that a lot of this is performance. And so how do you know, when it's real, when it's the performance? I don't know. The rates of depression and anxiety are way up by self-report, but they're also up for self-harm and suicide. So this isn't all performance. There is something really bad going on.
Okay, I think we're at time, John. I'm gonna conclude here with two FreeIC questions for you. The first,
Okay.
if you could change anything about the way you were raised, what would it be?
And about the way I was raised. Wow. I, gosh, that's hard because I think my mother did a great job. She was really skillful. My dad was much clumsier, but my mother was really good at making sure there were consequences for our behavior. Like one time she called me home from my friend's house. She called and said, "You have to come home right away." What is it? What is it? And she just looked at the table, and there was a box of ice, a carton of ice cream on the table. She said, "You left the ice cream on the table." So what? You called me home for that? Yeah. So my mother was incredibly skillful, and I have no complaints, no suggestions for how she could have raised me better. Probably I would be better if I had more adversity in my childhood. I didn't have much. I was very lucky, and I was, raised in an upper middle class household with two married parents. They had a bad marriage, but I didn't know it for a long time. I don't know. I'm just very grateful for the childhood that I had and for the skill, especially of my mother. So I don't know.
Okay. Final question for you then, John, is what about the future absolutely excites you right now?
What about it excites me? What about it excites me? Okay, I'll tell you. So every morning, so I teach a positive psychology course at NYU, and my co-teacher Mira Devji implemented this thing where we do the 5-minute journal. Here, I've got it right here. Let me see if I have it. The 5-minute journal, and so here it is. I highly recommend. It's wonderful. Every day. So here, every day you fill out. I am grateful for, and you put 3 things that you're grateful for. And then what would make today great, and then at the end of the day, you say 3 amazing things that happened. You reflect on what was good, counting your blessings. And by about a week into doing this, I realized something, and I came up with a formulation that really, this was like kind of transformational. This was like a real insight, and this was just before the COVID thing hit. But here it is on February 9th. I first said, I am grateful for being alive here, that is in the USA and in New York City, and there's nowhere else I'd rather live. There's no other country I'd rather live in, and there's no other city I'd rather live in. Now, that is, there's no other time I would rather be alive. I would not rather be alive in the 19th century or any other time. And with these people, when I thought about my family and all the teachers I've had and all the people who've contributed to my life, and I put that all together, and so now it's something I write every morning. I say, I am grateful to be alive, that I have the chance to be alive here, now, and with these people. And so if you just think about how lucky we all are, like, yeah, things are worse now than they were a few months ago, but think about how lucky we are to have a chance at all on this earth, and at a time of relative peace and prosperity and physical safety. I mean, even with the death rates now, it's nothing compared to 100 years ago. So I guess something that really excites me is just the chance to be here. How's that for an answer?
That is a wonderful answer. That's a wonderful answer to end this on. I think I want to thank you for taking the time. I think we learned today that John is excited to be here. We've learned don't invite him on a motorcycle ride or to skydive.
I'll have to say no. Yeah.
We've learned don't invite him to a classical music concert either.
Yeah.
And keep him away from record stores, but talk to him. John, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate everyone who tuned in. If you all want to keep up with the organizations represented here that put this together, I just shared the screen where you can find the websites and social links to keep up with. Hopefully we get a chance to do this again. Thank you everyone for tuning in and asking wonderful questions.
If I could just say just one thing, especially for the current college students, at Heterodox Academy, we have a beautiful new website, and we have all these groups that we've created. So if you go to the website, heterodoxacademy.org, and you click on Get Involved, you'll see there's a link to groups. There's a HX University or HX Undergrad or something. There's a group for current college students. So you've got lots of options for groups to help you do more of what you want to do, what you're doing here. So thank you to Free Intelligent Conversation, to BridgeUSA, to my colleagues at Heterodox Academy, and to all of you for joining the call.
Everyone stay safe. Have a wonderful evening or night wherever you are, and take care.
Good night.